There's a traditional Chinese curse. May you live in interesting times. Well, we certainly do live in interesting times. With a challenging leadership race being fought in the Conservative Party, it remains to be seen as to who will be leading the government and where they will be leading us over the coming weeks and months. One thing we do know is that we are a country and indeed a world that is in need of a healing touch, a touch that can calm down divisive and intemperate rhetoric and actions and lead us to a more positive future. Well, this week, as we've seen, our Torah portion is VA-ETCHANAN, and the traditional Haftarah portion is from Isaiah chapter 40. For most of the Jewish year, on Shabbat morning, we read a Haftarah that is thematically linked to the Torah portion. For 10 weeks in the summer, though, we read Haftarot that are linked to historical experiences. Well, this began 4 weeks ago with a reading from the prophet Jeremiah. It's believed that Jeremiah lived from 627 to 586 BCE, his life probably ending when the first temple was destroyed and the people were exiled to Babylonia. We don't hear anything more about him after that. Jeremiah warns the people of the impending destruction and punishment, which he claims comes as a result of their sinfulness. The first of the 10 Haftarot is read on the Shabbat after the 17th of Tammuz, the date on which the Romans were said to have breached the walls of Jerusalem in 70 CE. The choice of admonitions from Jeremiah was probably owing to the tradition that he, an eyewitness to the destruction of the first temple, was believed to be the author of the Book of Lamentations, Eicha, which we read on Tisha B'Av. The Jeremiah text is the first of 3 prophetic readings of admonition and warnings to Israel about the consequences of sin for those 3 weeks preceding Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, the date on which we commemorate the destruction of the first temple by the Babylonians, the second temple by the Romans, and other catastrophes in Jewish history. The Haftarot are from the prophets Isaiah and Jeremiah, dealing with the destruction of the first temple and the exile of the Jewish people. These are known in Aramaic as the Talat de Puranuta, the 3 of calamity. And following Tisha B'Av, we read 7 Haftarot from the prophet Isaiah, known as the Shiva de Nechemata, the 7 of comfort, each one with a message of hope, consolation, and the promise of a renewed relationship with God. So this Shabbat, the one immediately after Tisha B'Av, as we have seen, is named after the Haftarah Rita read for us today. These 7 weeks of prophecies of consolation lead us up to Rosh Hashanah. The cycle of the Jewish year is remarkable, I think, in its ability to lead us through the range of human emotions, to connect us with the cycle of nature and our Jewish historical experiences. So this time of year leads us to the profound sorrow and mourning of Tisha B'Av, to the comfort of Shabbat NACHAMU, through more weeks of consolation to the new year. Part of the genius of Judaism is to express and offer hope even in the darkest of times. And this time of year leads us from despair to comfort and consolation and to the hope of a better future. Last Sunday, many in the Jewish community gathered to commemorate Tisha B'Av. It's impossible to overemphasize the calamity that the destruction of Jerusalem and exile presented for the Jewish people at the time. And the 3-week period before Tisha B'Av is known as Bein HaMetzarim, between the straits. From the verse, all her oppressors have overtaken her between the straits in the book of Lamentations. Well, many progressive Jews do not mark Tisha B'Av, on which it is traditional to fast and observe a day of deep mourning. The rebuilding of the temple and reinstitution of the sacrificial cult as precursors to the appearance of the Messiah, restoration and redemption, run counter to progressive thought, and indeed have been removed from our liturgy. However, we can still learn about and learn from this day of fasting and mourning. And I have to tell you, I'm now part of Mosaic Jewish community, which has liberal, reform, and Masorti together. And last Sunday on Tisha B'Av, there was one Masorti rabbi and 5 liberals on Tisha B'Av. Go figure. Anyway, we live not only as individuals as in the present, but also as people in history. Tisha B'Av embodies much of the angst and suffering of Jewish history. Not only does it commemorate the destruction of the 2 temples, but other national calamities such as the fall of Beitar, the last stronghold of the Bar Kokhba War in the year 135, the expulsion of the Jews from England in 1290, and the expulsion from Spain in 1492 are linked to this day. Actually, most of the events didn't actually occur on the 9th of Av, but historical accuracy isn't the point here. The fast day has become the anniversary of these national disasters. Tisha B'Av gives us time to pause and think about disasters in our history, what caused them, and what can be learned from them. In the Talmud, the question is asked, why was the first temple destroyed? And the answer given is the following: because of 3 things that prevailed: idolatry, immorality, and bloodshed. But why was the second temple destroyed? Because groundless hatred, sinat chinam, prevailed there, which teaches you that groundless hatred is as grave as the 3 sins of idolatry, immorality, and bloodshed. I think that based on what our media reports, we appear to be perilously close to sinat chinam, groundless hatred, in our society, and impatience and unkindness and intolerance of other people's views if they don't agree with our own. And of course, yesterday's stabbing of Sir Salman Rushdie was an extreme and horrifying example of this. We can only hope that the political changes we are witnessing will ultimately lead to a better, kinder, more tolerant future for us and our children. One of my aunts used to live in Neve Shalom in Israel. On the wall in her home, there was an illustrated poem, and one stanza of it read, "You have thrown your stone into my water. You can never take it back. Neither can you stop the waves you caused from flowing. Forever and ever, they move in me." Well, the words of that poem resonate with me. Even the slightest, most fleeting contact we have with another causes ripples that can spread far and wide and have an impact. Have any of you read the book, The Love of 7 Dolls by Paul Gallico? Pleasure for you ahead, I think. Well, it's hopelessly sentimental, so I love it. But Paul Gallico is a wonderful author, wonderful writer. But The Love of 7 Dolls tells the tale of a young girl, little Mouche, who is down and out in Paris. At the beginning of the book, she has given in to despair and is walking to the Seine to drown herself. As she passes the empty stand of a puppet show, a voice speaks to her in a kind and compassionate way. It turns out to be Monsieur Renard, the fox puppet, and the words of the man controlling the puppet mark the beginning of a charming relationship between Mouche and all the puppets in the show that brings her from the brink of death and transforms her life. Of course, the impact we might make on another's life can be for the good or for the bad, which is why it's so important to ensure that the effect we have is as much as possible for the good. Then when the high holidays come in 6 weeks' time, and we reflect on our lives over the past year, we can hope that the weights are heavier on the side of the book of life. Even as the Second Temple was being destroyed, the actions of one man were responsible for the continuation of Judaism. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was the leading sage of the time. He was a Pharisee and a moderate who had hoped for a peaceful settlement of the war with Rome. When he saw that would not happen, he devised a bold plan. He arranged for some of his students to pretend he had died and then carry him out of Jerusalem in a coffin. In that way, he avoided the extremist Jewish zealots who prevented any Jews from leaving the embattled city, while at the same time eluding detection by the Romans. Yochanan ben Zakkai went to the Roman general Vespasian and asked for the safety of the town of Yavne and its small group of scholars. Legend has it that ben Zakkai predicted that Vespasian would become emperor of Rome, which he very soon did, and Vespasian was so impressed that he granted his wish. But whatever the facts, ben Zakkai did manage to build an academy near Yavne that revived Jewish spiritual life in that period of despair. Under his influence, Yavne became the religious and governmental center of the Jewish world. When ben Zakkai saw the fires that destroyed the temple, he tore his clothes and wept. But he assured his students that the sacrifices once brought to the temple were not the only means of atoning for sin. Prayer and acts of loving kindness, which could be performed anywhere, were as effective. And thus he showed the way to transferring temple rituals to the synagogue and the home, and assuring the continuity of Judaism. So today, just 7 days after Tisha B'Av, let us remind ourselves that every action we take now, if positive, could be the stone that sends healing ripples of water out into an ever-widening circle. Without Yochanan ben Zakkai's courage, we might not be here to tell the tale. I imagine that at the time he lived, and in the face of despair, he must have found it hard to believe that Judaism would survive. But partly thanks to his positive actions, here we are. There was another festival that took place during the past week. It was yesterday, in fact. 6 days after Tisha B'Av, the saddest day in the Jewish calendar, comes Tu B'Av, the 15th of Av, one of the happiest days. A little known or recognized holiday in the diaspora. In Israel, it's celebrated as a holiday of love, Chag HaAhava. According to the Mishnah, Tu B'Av was a joyous holiday in temple days, marking the beginning of the grape harvest. And incidentally, the extremely hot weather in our country has been a blessing in one way. Apparently the vineyards in this country are very happy about it, and there's going to be a fantastic grape harvest here. Tu B'Av was a day on which young people would go out dancing in the vineyards to find romance. Whereas Tisha B'Av commemorates destruction and exile from the land, Tu B'Av is a joyous celebration of the land and the return to it. It's also a celebration of love, which is surely what can redeem this world, as the Shema reminds us. Our Haftarah portions at this time of year lead us from despair to comfort to hope for the future. May we gain comfort and consolation from the knowledge that if we each do our part to increase love and kindness, then we bring the world a step closer to restoration and redemption. Kein Yehi Ratzon. May this be God's will. Amen.